Depositional landforms are found in the lower course of the river, so closer towards where the river enters the sea through the river mouth. The river valley is characterised by being much flatter, so you might have a much flatter, wider base to the valley. This is because of the lateral, the sideways erosion by the meander bends. But because in the lower course the river is losing its energy, then it's depositing material. It's putting material down onto the land rather than taking it away in erosion. Before we look at the landforms of deposition, let's have a look at how the sediment is moved and remind ourselves of that. So closer towards the source, the material is large, so the load that the river is carrying, there are large boulders, there are large pebbles. And then as they move towards the mouth of the river, the pebbles become slightly smaller. And this is because, of course, of the process of attrition. So the attrition makes the river sediment smaller. As the large boulders bang against each other, they become smaller, smoother, rounder, and then the pebbles bounce along the riverbed in a process called saltation. And then as they become even smaller through more attrition, as they travel down through the river channel, they're held up in suspension. And this is what much of the material is held in and transported by in the lower course of the river. Fine sands and silts held up in suspension, which is very often why rivers in the lower course look a brownish colour, because of all the sediment and silt that's being held up into it. And then even further than that, material can be dissolved into the river water by any weak acids that might be present. And then we have some landforms of deposition. We'll start with this one, which is an oxbow lake. So the oxbow lake does eventually show that it is a landform of deposition. So we can see the river channel here. There are 4 stages within this diagram. We've got stage A, B, C, and D. So this kind of moves across like that. And what happens is the river channel is moving south, and of course, when the water hits the outside of the river bend, that's where you have the lateral erosion. So where I'm drawing on red now, that's where you have erosion, because that's where the water is deepest, there's less friction, and there is more energy, so we've got this lateral erosion. And we can see that in stage 2 the erosion continues, and that which I'm circling in yellow now is the meander neck, so the meander neck, and that becomes narrower over time, so that we can see in diagram C that the neck is kind of joined up now, and that's when the deposition happens. So in green then the water flows straight through and there is deposition at the sides, and eventually in stage D it's fully deposited, and that leads to our oxbow lake. And you can see that with the bullet points on the right hand side. If you pause the video, you'll be able to read through my answer for how an oxbow lake is formed, remembering of course that keywords are always important, so things like lateral erosion, things like meander neck, things like why there is erosion, so the water is fast because of less friction. You could of course mention the types of erosion, hydraulic action and abrasion. Another landform of deposition is a floodplain, and this is formed sort of shown by this diagram. So there are 3 stages here. We've got A, B and C. And what happens is when the discharge is held within the river channel, i.e. the capacity of the river is able to hold the discharge, it's fine. But occasionally if there is periods of high rainfall or other reasons which may cause a flood, which we'll look at again, then the river will flood over the banks. It will overflow its banks. But as we've already said, there is much sediment held up in suspension within this river, and as it flows over the channel, it takes the sediment with it, and it deposits the sediment, so looking at diagram C now, it deposits the sediment in layers across the flat valley floor. The larger material is deposited closer to the river channel, and this builds up what we call levees. So these levees here, that's what a levee is, these piles of larger sediment deposited close to the river channel. And again, if you pause the video, on the right hand side there are some bullet points that explain how a floodplain is formed.